So I want to share with you actually my trip, to China. I talked to different people, etc. I think it may be interesting to talk a little bit of things on the ground. One thing I have to say very striking to me is you talked about this before. I think that how similar in a lot of ways U.S. and China actually are.
Mm,
Of all the Asian countries, actually China probably is most close to the West in a lot of ways. And what
mm,
I find interesting is like the challenges that both country actually there are lots of common things. For example, real estate market. So when I was in the US, I mean, in particular, commercial real estate is very bad, and the same is true in China, commercial real estate. Maybe that's a worldwide thing, I don't know. And then
mm,
residential. Now the US is still doing relatively okay, but I can see the price change as well. It's not as easy to sell, etc. And then
mm,
there is a real estate problem here, probably more clear,
mm.
but in any event, there is a real estate problem. And then the other thing is that this challenge of AI. Now, in the industry revolution and in the automation revolution, all those sort of things, we know that the lower tier jobs got taken over by the machine. But this time around, the AI is taking over like a mid-tier managerial jobs, right? Like a law clerks and marketing people. People used to, when I started working for Ericsson, one thing I did was creating all kinds of brochures for the Ericsson products, etc. And those kind of jobs are sooner or later going to be gone. So
Right.
now you see more and more people, have college degrees are having trouble to find decent jobs, well-paying jobs. And that is a problem in the US. And I find also problems here as well. So maybe
So
I don't know.
interesting.
Yeah, and maybe
Mm,
eventually that could be the problem for all the countries. I don't know, but it does
mhm,
seem to me. And I just read that like Shanghai just launched the self-driving taxis. So
mm,
remember Jerry Yang, he talked about in the 2020
mm,
election, he was talking about the
mm,
truck driver jobs will eventually disappear, which
mm,
is the last category of the blue collar jobs. Uh, and so he was saying that could be a problem. And here we are, have self-driving taxis, and who knows, when we're going to see the self-driving trucks, etc. So I just find that there's a lot of similarities in terms of the
yeah.
challenges, problems between and U.S. and China. Maybe
Mm,
because both are
yeah.
also big countries and more
Yeah.
high tech driven, etc. What is your view on that? Because you talked about this before.
No, I have, and of course, I've been to several Asian countries. I've been to Korea,
Hmm.
South Korea, which is, of course, has a big American presence. It's been an ally of the United States for a long time. I've been to Malaysia, and it was, and I've had lots of. I've never been to Japan, but I've worked very closely in the past with many people from Japan. I used to do a lot of work in the old times with people from Japanese businesses, and I have consistently found I found that China was by far the most open to a Westerner, the most easy place as a Western person, which is what I am, to understand and to work in. And when I went to China, I found that was absolutely the case. Obviously, there are significant cultural differences, but I found the cultural bridge much smaller than I had expected. I didn't experience the sort of sense of cultural difference that I encountered in Korea, for example. And I want to stress again, South Korea. So, I think that probably there are many explanations for this. I think that probably there is a degree of openness and self confidence about Chinese culture, which makes Chinese culture, because it is so much the oldest, so much the strongest culture amongst the Asian country cultures. That is not a value judgment. That is simply a statement of fact. It is the oldest amongst the East Asian cultures. Anyway, um, maybe that's partly the reason why the Chinese people are, in my opinion, more open and more relaxed about other things, more accepting of difference within their own country from themselves, and at the same time seem somehow to work and work in a way that is more compatible with the way that Westerners work. But I have to also say this: I do wonder whether the revolutions that took place in the 20th century, the revolution of 1911, and then the revolution of 1949, whether those haven't played a role as well. One of the things that immediately struck me about China, for example, is the very different status that women have in Chinese society as compared to what I found in other Asian states, and especially, by the way, in Japan. Just to say, so it did make me wonder whether there were these cultural similarities and cultural bridges between China and the West, which of course they have, and of course, as you correctly say, a huge country, technologically advanced, growing very fast, encountering many of the same problems that afflict the United States. And there are going to be differences too. I mean, China is much more today of an industrial society than the United States is. So that and has a much bigger manufacturing industry, not just in terms of scale and size, but volume of GDP. So that is also going to make a significant difference. But Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong once tried to explain to the Americans, we're not really that different from you. We're freedom loving, liberty loving people, like you say you are. We have many ideas in common. We would get on with you perfectly well if you just let us, if you just accepted us. And I think that they are right. I think this is exactly how I felt about China when I was there. I felt very much at home in China in ways that, as I said, Seoul, for example, felt a much more difficult city for me than Shanghai to find my way around.
Yeah. And I actually think because of that, I think U.S. and if U.S. let China again, today's U.S. let China work with the U.S. Will do fine. I think it will benefit the United States. Not just benefiting China. The United States can have the feeling if I let you work with me, somehow only benefit China. But it's actually I do think the U.S. can benefit a lot from China.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Again, the interesting contrast, by the way, is with Russia. Because Russia outwardly looks very European. It looks very like Western Europe, and very like the United States. And then you immediately discover that beneath the surface, lots of things are very different. And with China, it's the opposite. Outwardly, it appears different. I mean, the architecture is different, for example. The food is, well, of course, there's lots of Chinese food in the West now, but in the end, it's more similar. and it's an interesting contrast.
Okay, the NATO meeting, before we talk about NATO meeting ongoing right now, China, I find unusually, is having joined a military drill with Belarus now, close to the Polish border, which Poland, of course, is a NATO country. So the Chinese media's comment about that is because the NATO meeting, this is, I think, not the first time that South Korea and Japan are participating, and I think New Zealand too. So they are seriously trying to expand NATO to Asia. And so that's part of the China's message to NATO is like, mind your own business, don't do that, etc. That could be seen as one way that China is conducting. Now, officially, they say they're not targeting anybody. Belarus just joined SCO, and SCO is an organization that counter-terrorist organization. So we conduct a drill for counter-terrorists or something like that. But the message, the Chinese media believe this is the Chinese government's message to NATO. What do you take on that?
I think that's exactly correct. I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, we discussed Belarus and the advantages Belarus has gained from joining the SCO. The fact that it's now forging links, not just with Russia, but with other countries as well, including China, of course, and that's very important because otherwise Belarus might find itself over-dependent on Russia, which would not be good. And we see how this now works, not just to the advantage of Belarus, but also to the advantage of China itself, because China is now able to conduct military exercises in a country which is Europe, part of Europe. So if the Europeans and the Americans want to conduct exercises in the Far East on China's doorstep and enlist local Asian countries to join them in this, countries like Korea, Japan, and of course the Philippines. Well, the Chinese have demonstrated that they're perfectly able to do the same thing, and we're going to see more of this. There's and of course the Russians are doing the same. They sent their fleet to Cuba, close to the United States, and I understand the Chinese have a presence also in Cuba. We are starting to see much more of this going on. And again, the important thing to understand is who is driving all of this. The Americans are, because they insist on dividing the world into blocks. They want countries either to be with them or against them. They're furious with the Indians at the moment because Modi went to Moscow and had a meeting there about which the Chinese are completely unconcerned. I've been reading Chinese media articles about this, with the Americans, smoke coming out of their ears over it. But that's the way it is. I mean, they can't accept that other countries have a right to live their own lives and want to conduct exercises close to their shores, then they should not be surprised when those countries pay the United States back and the Europeans back in their own coin.
And what else will this NATO meeting achieve other than trying to provoke something, get the Japan and South Korea to come to? I think they also invited New Zealand in the meeting. Clearly, they're trying to get their influence into Asia. That's what they're trying to do, and they're not going to let the Ukraine in, right? So that's that much we know. But what else do you think they're trying to achieve here? Blaming everything on
nothing constructive and nothing positive. Everything now is about bloc confrontation, about doing everything they can to prop up the United States, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day, and to try to prolong this period of American hegemony, which is now well past its sell-by date. So that's what it's going to be all about. So it means, supporting the Americans in confrontations with China, supporting the Americans in the proxy war that they're waging against Russia in Ukraine, trying to enlist as many countries into all that as possible, saying horrible things about Russia. Well, that's perhaps what one would expect by now, but saying equally horrible things about China, which China has done absolutely nothing at all to bring on itself. If you're talking about Russia, well, Russia has a complicated relationship with the West going back centuries. China, what has it done?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree. Now, just so you know, even the CNN, this is the CNN, when they talk about the NATO, they said before Biden can save Ukraine, he must use the NATO summit to save himself. Maybe that's one of the goals, so that he could show the world. He made an opening remark, and some media reporting that it's powerful, it's very message. Maybe that's one thing they do want to see. He's showing his powerful side or something, that I'm still in charge, and etc. That could be another thing for me to achieve, I guess. Good luck with that.
Well, good luck with that, indeed. I mean, I think one of the things that people who talk in that way just don't understand is that only a limited number of people watch the television debate, but enough did. And that people will talk about that. And in America, voters will notice it, and they've seen all the clips and all of this.
Mhm.
American voters are not going to be very interested in any powerful speeches or supposedly powerful speeches
Powerful.
that Biden makes at the NATO summit meeting. I mean, it's going to go completely over their heads. They're not interested in any of that. So
Mhm.
if they think that this is going to save or rescue Biden in terms of the election in November, it won't. Now, what it will do in terms of his candidacy as president, I don't know. I mean, I get the sense that um, after lots of thinking about this and toing and froing, the old man simply refuses to go. And I think that the grudging conclusion that more and more people in the Democratic Party are slowly coming to is that the trouble and mess of just getting him out would be too great and would do too much damage. So they'll just have to bite their tongues and stick with him and hope for the best. I think that we're now back in that stage again.
Yeah. Although I do see that there are maybe CNN conducted some polls, maybe the some other news media. They're saying they already conduct polls to see Kamala Harris, which you talked about that she has to be on the table, you know,
Yeah,
etc. because
no.
constitutionally. So they're conducting polls between Kamala Harris and Trump. So she lead with 1%, which is within the margin of error. And they even conduct polls between Trump and Hillary Clinton. It seems like Hillary Clinton is back now in the picture. And so, what do you say about that? Is that there are still people are trying to push him, but most people accept it.
I think this is the other big problem they have because if there was a really commanding figure within the Democratic Party, someone who looked like they were really popular, someone who, if you stepped in or she stepped in and took over from Biden, and that looked like they would win and win a big majority in November, well then you could see that the momentum behind that person would build and maybe at that point, the people from the Senate and the House, the Democrats would come around to the White House and would say, Mr. President, we think the world of you, but really you have to go and step down because we can't support you anymore. We've got to hold on to the White House. This person looks like a guaranteed winner and something like that. Well, they can't really say that because Kamala Harris perhaps as a 1% lead, but as you said, it's within the margin of error.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton lost against Trump in 2016 and is likely to lose all over again. Newsom in California, frankly, doesn't look to me hugely convincing. So they just don't have anyone like that. And that plays, of course, to the advantage of the incumbent, who is Joe Biden.
Yeah. So far, it seems like they tuned down quite a bit in terms of calling him to lead,
Mm,
lead the race and something. Yeah.
yeah.
The other thing happening is that Japan and the Philippines now signed a key defense pact, which, even the ABC, okay, ABC reported this way. They said Japan and the Philippines signed a key defense pact Monday, allowing the deployment of the Japanese forces for joint drills in the Southeast Asian nation that came under brutal Japanese occupation in World War II, but is now building an alliance with Tokyo as both faces increasing assertive China. So even the ABC is reminding everybody, right, during World War II, the Philippines was under brutal occupation by the Japanese. And so, I mean, the Chinese media has been talking about this, and many people are saying you can have alliances with any other Asian country will be better than Japan because Japan
Yeah.
actually, if you involve Japan, it's actually make if your enemy is China, well, then you actually are less safe because China will have
Yeah.
no problem to attack the military base or troops or whatever from Japan. Do you agree on that assessment?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is a terrible thing, and it tells you again what the malign influence of the United States and what it's doing, because it's the US which is really putting together these alliances. So Japan returns to the Philippines. This is a Japan led by a Japanese government that has now basically revised the entire history of the Second World War, regards what Japan was doing during the Second World War was basically fine and isn't bothered by it any longer. So they're coming back to the Philippines with these old attitudes and ideas. They're going to establish bases in the Philippines. They're going to antagonize China, which, of course, was the Philippines' ally during the Second World War against the Japanese. China is the Philippines' biggest trading partner, I understand, and it is the country that can provide the investment and the technology and the support which the Philippines, with its many profound economic problems, needs in order to escape the sense of poverty that it is in. All of this is not to the benefit of the Philippines. I question myself whether it is to the benefit of Japan, by the way. It is entirely to the benefit of one other party, which is the United States.
And also, the Philippines, speaking about the Philippines, they also did another thing, which is they submitted a UN filing on seabed territory, Sabah. It's a long-standing dispute with Malaysia. And Malaysia was very angry because before this, both countries are trying to keep it like blurry, right? Not very clear. I mean, it's a dispute, but nobody trying to escalate it. But by filing this UN filing, that make more, it's kind of like an escalation of the matter. So what is the Philippines doing? Not only they are against the China, but they're irritating like countries like Malaysia. Is Philippines just want to be the bully in Asia now, in the region now? What is the thinking or doing these things?
Yeah, I mean, Malaysia, which is, of course, now a proudly independent country with a growing economy and a
Mhm.
significant industrial base, has plans one day to join the BRICS, and which has good relations with both China and Russia. Same, of course, for Indonesia, same for Vietnam. These are the countries that are doing well. Philippines is not doing so well. I think the fundamental difference is that the Philippines was a former American colony, and it has never really managed to gain full independence of the United States. There have been moments like under former President Duarte when it seemed briefly like it was going to break away from American control, but it has never really achieved it. So the result is that despite the fact that the American rule, colonial rule of the Philippines is very cruel, and is very well known by many Filipino people. I mean, there's large numbers of Filipinos in Greece, for example, where, by the way, they are the preferred domestic servants of the Greek
Yeah,
oligarchy.
in China
I've
too.
encountered that myself.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I've spoken to them because, I mean, this is one of the things I used to do in Greece. Shocking. Many of their employers actually spoke to these people as people, and I found out what they really feel. Anyway, they dislike their own oligarchy. Despite all of that, all the levers, it has connections to the military, the security services, the intelligence services, elements of what you might call the business community, though the economic oligarchy would be the powerful landed families role. And these forces feel themselves very aligned to the United States, which prolong and perpetuate their power within the Philippines. And I think the Philippines is just a hostage to that kind of American power. Now, there may be some people in the Philippines who think that on the back of the United States, they can assert themselves as the major power in the Pacific. I mean, if they think that, they're totally delusional. But I accept that there are people who think in delusional ways. There might be some people who think in that way, but I don't think most people in the Philippines think like that. I'm pretty sure most people in the Philippines do not agree with these policies. Just saying. But it seems to me that the present government, led by President Marcos Jr., who is deeply compromised figure, we know all about his father. I can see exactly why they might be doing all of these things because straightforwardly America owns them.
Mhm. Yeah, unfortunate. Yeah. Okay. Modi's visit to Russia. Um,
Yeah,
it seems like I guess the surprising part for me is that they are so warm to each other, right? The two
yeah,
leaders, and now they signed. I read somewhere over 100 different kinds of contracts. From energy to um, even possibility of their militaries could use different countries' harbor and stuff like that. And so, what
yes.
is your take on that? Does that truly anger the United States? Any surprise
It
there?
has angered. It has angered the United States. The Americans are absolutely furious about it. It is absolutely fascinating to see, by the way, how the two great powers, the United States and China, have reacted to this visit. China completely calm. I've been reading
Mhm.
articles in Global Times and elsewhere saying, this is just India, acting like an independent country. They're completely relaxed about this. I don't know whether it's been reported widely in China, but the president of the Chinese National People's Congress is
Mhm.
currently in Russia, having a parallel visit to Modi's. He's
Okay.
visiting St. Petersburg. He's been hosted in the Duma, all of that. No problems there. Absolutely no problems about this visit, despite all of these issues that do exist between China and India. The United States, absolutely furious, asking the Indians, why are you there? What are you doing? Apparently sending communications to Delhi, complaining about Modi's visit to Moscow, and really very, very angry and feeling that somehow Modi has let them down. And apparently, this is, I found absolutely bizarre, one of the things that has angered the administration particularly is that Modi, the leader of what the United States acknowledges is the world's biggest democracy, has gone to Moscow and met with Putin exactly at the same time as the NATO summit meeting in Washington is taking place. And apparently, there's some people in Washington who think this is all done on purpose to divert attention away from the NATO summit and to make that summit look less important than it really is, as if anybody even needed to do that. But I mean, that tells you the difference. I mean, the Chinese, as I said, perfectly relaxed about this. The Americans furious about this. And, ultimately, it's important to remember that India and Russia have very long, historic, very friendly relations going all the way back to Indian independence. They've always been friends. These two countries know each other well. They've got on very well with each other. It is absolutely understandable that Russia, as it revives economically, wants to re-establish its old commercial and economic links with India. It's widely forgotten that in the 60s, the Soviet Union was India's biggest trading partner, just saying. So, they want to go back to something like that. And India, for its part, wants to have good relations with its old friend, which can provide it with all kinds of things that India needs, like oil, fertilizer, chemicals, things like that, and a certain amount of technology. It's an interesting relationship because um, in economic terms, it's um, structurally, Russia is the dominant partner in it because the
Mhm.
Russians have many more things that they can trade with and provide than India has. And this is the single biggest problem, that the Indians are having to look for ways to pay for the things they want to buy from the Russians, which is awkward for them to do. And at the same time, to sort out currency systems and payment
Yeah.
systems and that kind of thing. But yeah, this is a good good visit for both countries. It is absolutely not a visit that is in any way targeted at third countries. The Russians absolutely are not siding with India against China. That is an absurd idea. No one in Moscow thinks in that kind of crazy way. And the Indians, for their part, they need Russian oil, they need Russian gas, they need Russian fertilizer, they need Russian food. They want help from the Russians in quantum computers, apparently. I've no real idea what that is. All I know is that the Chinese are supposed to be the world leaders in it. But anyway, they want Russian help in that. So anyway, that's where it goes.
Said the White House spokesperson, she said that India can urge Russia to stop the war, something like that. And it's not that long ago, the Finland president said something about Xi Jinping, right? Xi Jinping could just make a phone call and could just end the whole thing. Why are they just saying something like that that they know is not true? I mean, they just want to blame this whole war on Russia and this war in Ukraine, on China, on India. Is that what they're trying to do? That's not true. I mean, nobody have really can just control Putin the way they
I
think,
mean, it's
right?
no, absolutely, it's completely untrue. I mean, there's no reality to this at all. I mean, first of all, it sulks. I mean, they're very angry, as I said, that the Indians that are developing this relationship with Russia, which, to be clear, is economically very important for India. I mean, India has many, many, many economic problems. A lot of people talk about India as, the country with the fastest growing economy, the country that will one day be a superpower. That underestimates the many intractable problems that India has. In industry is actually falling as a share of the Indian economy. It's not industrializing. I mean, that's, I think, a thing which people don't understand. There is growing poverty in India. India has a major inflation problem because of the general rise in prices that's taken place around the world, except in China, by the way. But the general rise in prices. It needs cheap energy. It needs food. It needs fertilizer. It needs all of these things. Russia can offer these things. They may not be some of the most, some of the sort of industrial, high technology things. The Russians can offer some of that too. But the Russians can provide the Indians with many of the things that India needs to balance its own economy out. But of course, the Americans see everything, absolutely everything, in geostrategic terms. They always say that you're either with us or you're against us. And they don't like the fact that India is going to Russia at all. And they say, oh, well, if you're going to Russia, then for heaven's sake, tell them to stop the war, as if the Indians really can tell the Russians, as you correctly said, to stop the war. And of course, the other reason they say that is because they don't want to accept that the Russians have their own agency, that they're able to conduct a war by themselves, that they have a significant economy, a significant industrial and technology base. The Americans don't want to admit that their sanctions have failed. So again, they blame everyone else. They blame the Chinese, they blame the Indians, they blame the Qataris, the UAE, they blame the Turks, they blame everybody for the fact that it hasn't turned out in the way they thought it would.
That you brought up, lots of people expecting India to be the next, rising power, etc. I
Yeah.
mean, India, first of all, GDP, we talk about this many times. There's so many ways to calculate GDP, and GDP is,
Yeah.
there is no uniform way to calculate. It's very much different country to calculate it. And the other thing I find interesting is that because of the rise of China, many countries, including India, believe that they could do what China has achieved. And India in particular, because India now has the largest population, and they think having a huge population alone somehow equal to be a great power, and you will become a great power just because you have the most population, which is totally misunderstand and not truly understand what China have done to achieve what China achieved today. I think lots of people still don't quite understand the Chinese model. It requires, several generations of good leadership. Now, of course, hardworking and this long tradition of education, focusing on education, etc., etc. I mean, there's so many things needed to achieve what China achieved, but I think many countries actually think it too simple in terms of China's success and development. Don't you agree?
You are absolutely correct. I mean, there is no. I mean, you can't simply look at what the Chinese did and say, I can do it too. I mean, it isn't like that. I mean, what the Chinese did required an enormous amount of very hard work, very, very good thinking. It required China to educate its population, to create, a highly educated, technically skilled uh, um, population. It needed China to create um, a very strong tradition in management, particularly if I can say, management of big projects. It needed China to develop a massive engineering and high technology base. These things are not achieved in a day. And of course, it also required a huge ability to organize and mobilize resources. And here, of course, China has traditional skills that it could draw upon, which many other countries don't. Again, this is where, if you know anything at all about Chinese history, you will know a lot about this. You will know, for example, about how China has a long, long history of river and flood management, for example, which has provided an understanding of how to, to move thousands of people and how to plan ahead and organize in a big way. And China, of course, was the first country in, especially the porcelain industry, which I've studied, by the way, to develop techniques of mass production. So they were able to draw on all of this and work on this and build on it and do it, as you correctly said, through a lot of thinking and very, very hard work. Um, India has never been able to replicate that. And in order to replicate some of it, the country it nearly really needs to work with is China. If China and India sorted each other out, and the Chinese came to India and started to establish factories and production there and build railways and do all of those kind of things, then the Indians would gradually acquire those skills and would start to be able to do them themselves. But simply looking at it from a distance and saying, this is what the Chinese do and we can do the same, it doesn't work like that.
And which is why I think the Chinese government sincerely, not just casually saying, sincerely said it many times to all the countries that they're not pushing the Chinese model, right? Every country needs to find its own way, its own path to success, which is again very different from the United States and the West. The United States and the West always, democracy, whatever their ideologues, they push through whatever the Western system that they think will work for you. They always push for that. Now, China, on the other hand, always saying you need to find your own path, right? You can learn from us, you can learn from other countries, but eventually, ultimately, you need to find, what is your strengths, your weaknesses, and an unique way for your own success, your own path to success, which is, very different from the West, right?
That is exactly correct. And I'm going to say it. I mean, I think if India wants to develop and grow, then it needs to stop worrying about China and trying to copy what China has done, and look really at its own problems, and start to address some of the very intractable issues within Indian society. The issues that divide the Indian people from each other. I don't want to dwell on them, but we all know what I mean. Look at questions of education. Look at also infrastructure, which India has hardly really worked on. I mean, the Chinese made massive investments in infrastructure. Things of that kind. I mean, some things are happening in India. The country is becoming connected via the internet and mobile phones and things like this. But this is happening from below, and you have to have that. But what you also have is you also need that push from above as well. You need to bring the two together at the same time. Macroeconomic stability, and at the same time have a government with a dynamic development strategy based on actual realities, and which draws on the strengths and on the natural abilities and traditions of your own people. And I think India can do this, but I mean, it's not going to be simple, and it's not going to be done simply, as I said, by copying what the Chinese have done, or being jealous and envious of what the Chinese have done.
Okay, I also read something about Saudi. So apparently, Bloomberg reported that Saudi, they privately hinted earlier this year that they might sell some of the European debt holdings if the G7 decided to seize the, I think, 280 billion of Russian frozen assets. And the Saudis specifically mentioned the debt issues by the French Treasury. Now, I'm a little bit surprised by that, but what's your take on that? Why is this so important for Saudi to protect
Yeah,
the
it's a
Russian
huge story.
frozen asset? Yeah.
Well, I think this is a huge story, actually,
Yeah.
because it's most unusual for the
Mhm.
Saudis to come out and be as straightforward as this and be as threatening as this with the Europeans. Now, the Saudis did this not because they like the Russians. I mean, as it happens, they got very good relations with the Russians. But the Saudis ultimately are protecting their own interests. And they say if the Europeans can seize Russian assets, they can come after our own assets. And
Mhm.
our assets in Europe are far greater than the Russians have. In fact, there's no comparison. I mean, the Saudis and the other Gulf states have huge holdings in Europe and, by the way, in Britain too. And they don't want to create a precedent here. And for that reason, the Saudis said, under no circumstances do you do this thing. Because if you do this, we know that you can do this to the Russians. And we know this, that one day you might decide to do it to us. And the Saudis said no. And if you do, we will take all our things out and we will put it where it's safe, which of course, to be straightforward about it, is China, because that is the only place they could put it where it would be safe. And the Europeans, I think, got scared because the investment, not just from the Saudis, from the Gulf, is enormous, and that concentrated minds and made them pull back. And the Americans, again, are very, very angry. They're very angry with the Europeans, and they're very angry with the Saudis too. But you can see why the Saudis would have acted in that same way. The Saudis also, by the way, are known to have been absolutely furious about the price cap that the G7 imposed or sought to impose on Russian oil. Because, of course, oil is the lifeblood of the Saudi economy, and the Saudis are the key, most important player in OPEC. And as far as the Saudis are concerned, it is Saudi Arabia and OPEC that decides what oil price is. So again, didn't understand this episode how angry the Saudis are now becoming with the West.
The other thing I noticed is that, Saudi and India, I mean, all these countries, they all, I mean, before recent time, they all had lots of a swing. I mean, Saudi, very rich, like you said, have investment everywhere. They always have been very influential country. And India, of course, being a large country, they have a very unique geography there as well, advantage as well. So this country has always had influence. But don't you say that in recent times they are getting more and more assertive in the international affairs? Like even like Turkey, even Bulgaria now are buying oil from Iran, defying the sanction, for example. So don't you think more and more countries are getting more and more assertive, which is another way to say the West is losing control more and more?
They are becoming more assertive, and that, of course, is again the product of the multipolar system that is developing. And the reason the multipolar system is developing is because there is now an alternative. There are countries like the key country again. And whenever we talk about multipolarity, we must always understand that the key country is China. It's China's rise that has completely transformed the geopolitical landscape. If there had not been the rise of China over the last 30 years, well, probably American power would have eroded to some extent, but to nothing like the extent that it has now. So people see that there are alternatives to choose, and they're starting to say, well, we don't need to be so afraid of the Americans anymore, because if the Americans don't like what we're doing, then we always can go elsewhere. And they're also, frankly, very frustrated with the Americans, who are such difficult people to work with. And they see that the other side, China, is so much more reasonable. So, they're starting to make decisions themselves. They're starting to assert themselves. They're starting to get the confidence to assert themselves. And I'm going to say also, the failure of the American sanctions war against Russia has been a major catalyst, because it has demonstrated again to the world, that to many countries, that it is actually possible to resist the United States and to win, to be able to move forward, do what you want, and you won't have your economy destroyed in the way that had seemed likely once upon a time. Now, of course, Russia has unique advantages which many other countries don't have. But the mere fact that one country has succeeded in defying the Americans, provides an example.
Yes, the war in Ukraine, of course, it's not just Ukraine, right? It's backed by NATO, which is 33 countries, but Ukraine still cannot win. That's obvious to everybody now. And then, of course, the war in Gaza, which Israel is backed by the United States, and Israel now is in big trouble as well. I mean, all these things combined together, telling the world that the mighty US is not, probably not that mighty, right?
You are absolutely right. I think one of the things that has happened over the last 3 years is that the military juggernaut that everybody believed the United States and the West to be has been proved to be an emperor without clothes. I mean, Israel has been unable to defeat Hamas. This is after months of intense fighting, endless. The United States can't build a pier in Gaza. I mean, that has been a shock and a massive embarrassment for most people. But the biggest shock of all, unquestionably, has been Ukraine, because one advanced American weapon system after another is sent to Ukraine and promptly fails. I mean, we've had that with the HIMARS systems and the ATACMS systems and the Patriot systems, and it turns out that the other side is as technologically advanced as the Americans are, and in fact ahead of the Americans in many fields. So this is again, acted as a massive blow to the prestige of the United States and of the Western powers.
So isn't that a good reason for the United States to be peaceful? Because if you are the number one, you are the big boss in the world, don't you think it serves best interest for the United States that things keep unchanged? When you have a war, when you have a huge event like a war, it has the possibility, always have the risk to change something. Don't you think that's just the miscalculation from the United States, that they need a war to show their mightiness or whatever, but they never thought about the downsides of it, the risk of it. The risk of it is that when you have a war, what if you don't win, right? Even a proxy war, that actually undermines yourself, isn't it? It serves the best
You're
interest for the
absolutely
United States to be peaceful, actually.
You are absolutely completely correct. Now, can I just say that this is very much, you're speaking very much like somebody who comes from the Chinese tradition, because this is very much the Chinese tradition. You say to yourself, well, look, you're the major power.
Mhm.
The entire system, the whole system of international relations has developed around you. You are the beneficiary of this.
Mhm.
Why are you constantly trying to you know break things up and smash things up and taking these terrible risks? Help develop this system, bring other people in, make them work with you, and that way they will benefit and you will benefit also. That's absolute classic Chinese statecraft, if I may say, if you know Chinese history. And it's completely correct. This is why China is the oldest country in the world, if I can say, because it is the oldest state in the world, because it has this understanding that this is how international relations should be conducted. The Americans just don't get this at all. They seem to think that in order to remain strong, they must assert themselves all the time against everybody. And that if anybody goes up a little, they must knock them down again. And as you absolutely correctly said, that works against them. It creates chaos and instability in the system. And it creates risks, immense risks, for the United States itself. It opens the way to military defeats and economic embarrassments, which the American interest should be to avoid. But I've tried to discuss this with Americans. Even Professor Mearsheimer doesn't seem to get this. They constantly think that your power is measured by your ability to dominate the other person, and that is a complete misunderstanding of how to wisely exercise power.
You guys just have to learn it the hard way, I guess. I mean, it will learn.
Well,
One
it
way or
is a
another.
very young country. I mean, this is again the difference with China. I mean, China has a history going all the way back to the Xia, the Shang, all of that. I mean, it's got this huge tradition of statecraft. The United States only became independent in the 18th century, and it only began to take a big role in global affairs at the end of the 19th. So it's got an awful lot to learn, but it's not proving to be a good student, which is the problem.
Okay. All right. Just before we finish, I want to share with you. Do you know somebody asked this question to AI between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Who should be the president of the United States? Just like a job interview. Okay, you're the one to pick. So if you, the AI, to pick who should be the next president. And guess the answer, the AI said, I'm not going to pick any one of them.
Demonstrates a degree of wisdom that the Americans seem to have lost. I mean, seriously, the way in which politics in the United States has developed into a way where everything is reduced to these two individuals is astonishing. And well, we can discuss Trump, until infinity, because at least there is a kind of political force behind Trump. But Biden, we spoke earlier about the fact that there is no convincing alternative to Biden within the Democratic Party who can step in and correct the situation. Why is that so? Because the political system worked to eliminate anybody who might have been a challenge to the kind of status quo establishment system that Biden represented. So Bernie Sanders, JFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, you name them, they were all purged. So the result is you're left with just this inadequate man and a political desert all around him. So that's how it's happened. I mean, it's been an astonishing story, and it tells you so much about the failure of the political system in the United States. Good for AI. It shows that it has promise after all.
Yes, I'm impressed.
I'm impressed, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll let you go. So thank you again. I'm sure until next Wednesday, there will be a lot to discuss
Next
again.
Wednesday, there'll be an awful lot to discuss. Have a great day, Sophia.
Thank you.
See you next week. Right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.